watching KOIN 6 News at 5. Watching out for you.
There's not a part of the city that's not been touched by gun violence.
Portland's leading homicide detective stating the facts plainly and clearly last month. To quote her, an amazing amount of firearms and amazing disregard for human life on the streets of Portland. It is 5 o'clock. I'm Jeff Gianola.
And I'm Elizabeth Din. We're talking about a trend that has only gotten worse since we first looked into the rise in deadly shootings last May. Tonight, we continue our series, Is Portland Over?, by taking another look.
And our Liz Birch joins us now. And Liz, gun violence and homicide straining resources in the police bureau, but you found out it is also straining our city's justice system.
Yeah, we looked into all of this, and according to the data, we're actually on pace right now to surpass last year's record number of homicides, most of those from shootings.
To see that city like that it's so horrible. It's so bad. The violence, like you can't even walk downtown without being literally afraid for your life.
What we have is reports of 6 to 7 people shot.
It's just sad to see that 2 years ago the city didn't look like this, didn't act like this, and it's been absolute chaos for the last 2 years.
Another very frustrating and sad weekend in Portland.
Homicide victims' families, people who hear gunshots from their homes, and cops are fed up with Portland's gun violence.
There's a serious disregard for human life going on in the city.
Sergeant Michelle Hughes oversees Portland's homicide detectives. She says it's tough for her teams to go from call to call to call.
Officers are doing a wonderful job of battle care out on the field, where they're putting tourniquets and chest seals and packing wounds, and they're taking care of a lot of these folks, and getting them to the hospital.
Sounds like a war zone out there, what you're describing.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. It really is. There's been multiple scenes where we've been out investigating a homicide and we can hear shots being fired near us and around us.
With resources stretched thin, she says clearance rates are down. She tells me there's been an uptick in daylight shootings. And the violence isn't contained to one part of Portland.
They don't care, they don't care that they're in the middle of downtown and it's 5 o'clock and there's lots of people around.
Another chilling new aspect, she says shooters are now willing to fire dozens of rounds.
That's scary when you think about, who else is downrange of those rounds being fired that potentially could be a victim.
And Hughes says a recent development is how many of these shootings are at homeless camps.
Between the gang violence and the houseless community, those are probably our two biggest, rivaling contributors to homicides and shootings right now.
She's been with the Bureau 24 years.
The city was much different when, years ago when I was a patrol officer, and then as I worked my way up to the sergeant level. We didn't have the amount of homicides that we have today.
Homicides have risen quickly in the Rose City in recent years. According to police data, in 2016, there were 16 homicides, 57 in 2020, and then a record-breaking 90 last year. That far surpasses Portland's previous record of 66 homicides in 1987.
Sadly, shootings and homicides show no sign of slowing down this year. Police tell me between January through April of last year, there were 29 homicides. This year, that number is 33 for the same time period. When it comes to shootings, they say in that time period there have been 359 last year. This year, 479.
The comparisons for this year are grim too. According to police data, through March of this year, Portland had more homicides than San Francisco and Seattle combined. In a press conference, Mayor Ted Wheeler talked about the rise in shootings.
The city started addressing this spike in homicides and shootings last year. But this year, things are actually getting worse. So is what the city's doing not working, and what needs to change?
Thank you for the question, Liz. And we're, of course, all waiting to see the turnaround. I'm determined to see gun violence be reduced in our community. And obviously, that would happen much faster if we had more officers.
Chief Chuck Lavelle says right now they have a total of 772 sworn members, a fraction of what a city this size should have.
I'm wondering if you have any indication how many officers plan to retire in July.
I know we have about 90 who are eligible this calendar year. So between now and the end of the year, I'd say the majority of those are probably July.
He says they're hoping to hire more officers soon through recruitment and the Retire Hire program. They just hired 8 background investigators to help speed up that process. They also just expanded their homicide unit to deal with that historic rise in homicides. They now have 3 teams of 8. They had to shift detectives and sergeants from other units to do that, though, even reassigning everyone in their cold case unit to work on current homicides. The rise in homicides and shootings isn't just impacting police. In March, Chief Deputy District Attorney Kirsten Snowden explained the DA's office have reallocated their resources to focus on gun violence.
We're becoming overwhelmed.
She says they've lost about a dozen deputy DAs in the last year.
Our criminal justice system is simply in crisis.
The DA's office tells me they're managing the workload in the wake of historic caseloads and the gun violence epidemic by a steady hiring pace. But admit cases are taking longer to resolve because of the court backlogs and because the types of cases they're seeing an increase of are among the most time-consuming.
Unfortunately, due to the crushing caseloads, we've lost over 150 years of prosecutorial experience in the last year alone.
Metropolitan Public Defenders told me by mid-April the court had dropped around 40 cases due to a lack of public defenders, a conversation we've seen playing out in court.
We had hoped to have an attorney to appoint to represent you today, but we don't.
In that specific case, the judge decided to have the defendant come back in a month. But as the executive director of Metropolitan Public Defenders, Carl McPherson, explains, if the state charges someone with a crime, that person is presumed innocent and has the constitutional right to a lawyer. Without counsel, their due process rights would be violated.
Have you guys lost a lot of public defenders recently, or is it just that there are so many new cases that you can't handle the amount there are?
The pandemic exacerbated an already untenable situation where caseloads were already extremely high and almost at excessive levels coming into the pandemic, but then the backlog that was created during the pandemic exacerbated that.
McPherson says their office has had a problem with turnover due to a variety of factors, but it mostly comes down to the workload, low pay, and lack of resources. The problem is so serious, Mayor Ted Wheeler recently penned a letter to Governor Kate Brown and other leaders saying, quote, I am acutely aware of the resource shortages our criminal justice system faces across the board. Our city faces historically low numbers of police officers and significant staffing shortages in district attorney offices as well. However, the public defender crisis must be prioritized immediately.
And we did ask the district attorney's office for an interview about how they're handling this historic number of cases. They declined, but I was able to talk to another DDA yesterday in a press conference. She referred back to their previous statements about being short-staffed and having those crushing caseload. Something else I wanted to bring up, Liz and Jeff, something that's come up a lot in this conversation about the rise in gun violence and homicides is that it's not just Portland, it's happening everywhere. And that is true. But I also think it's important to reiterate, according to the FBI, the increase here between 2019 and 2020 was 83%. Nationally, the number was 30%.
And you know, when you talk to people, say in these neighborhoods, like you were in Southeast, who were saying there was a woman in her apartment with her cat and she can't dodge bullets in her own apartment, like but she's having to live in fear. So even though we're looking at other cities in those numbers, these are our communities, our neighbors who are impacted by this ongoing violence. Liz, thank you for that report.
All right, Liz. Well, now we have some